welcome to Temple Talk. This is Tzav. Today is the 6th day of the month of Nisan, 5780. It's the 31st of March, 2020. I'm speaking from Jerusalem. It's a very quiet town these days, as everybody is staying indoors as per orders of our Prime Minister, our Health Minister, and basically the police and the army and the intelligence services. Everyone is involved in keeping everybody here as safe as possible. I pray that everybody listening is healthy and that you and your loved ones and friends and members of your community are all healthy. And anybody who is not, we wish them a refuah shlema, a quick and complete recovery from this very, very, very terrifying coronavirus, which is worldwide, as everybody knows, and everybody has to be careful. Certain areas are hit harder than others, but it seems that nobody is immune to it. And if anybody is, then please step forward. We'd like to know your secret so we could share it with the rest of us. So as I said, I made my way in today in order to record. It's the first time I've been in Jerusalem since last Tuesday when I recorded Temple Talk. And as I said, it's a very, very quiet town. I miss the hustle and the bustle and the crowds and the noise and the excitement that I usually encounter when coming to Jerusalem every day of the week. And pray that soon we'll be able to return to those days once again, although I know it won't be that soon. We're certainly talking about, I think, weeks from now before we can all begin to return to our normal lifestyles, our routines. And I imagine that some routines will never be returned to, maybe for the better, with all this time in isolation, alone or in isolation with family. We have lots of time to think and to contemplate and to reflect, and I would advise people to take advantage of that, because that's what we've got right now, and let's all work on a little self-improvement maybe, and maybe cut out some things in our lives that we thought were really necessary but not so necessary. Maybe emphasize some other things that we've been putting off for a rainy day, but the rainy day has come, and now's the time to focus on those things that are really important to us. For example, this week's a Parashat reading, Parashat Tzav, the second Torah reading of the book of Leviticus. It begins in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1, concludes chapter 8, verse 36. Reading at this Shabbat, again, synagogues are closed, so there's no reading in the synagogues. Of course, the custom of every Shabbat for thousands of years is temporarily halted. I'm reading it at home, and I imagine many, many other people are. It's also the Shabbat right before the holiday of Passover, known as Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Shabbat, the Great Sabbath. And there are different reasons why it's called that. One is that it was the day, actually, that in Egypt, they say that it was this day that Israel was commanded to bring a lamb into their house. It was the 10th of the month, and 4 days before the slaughtering of the lamb, the Pesach lamb, and leaving Egypt. Another reason why it's attributed to its being named Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Sabbath, is that it was an opportunity, as many people were crowding the synagogues on this Sabbath before Passover, an opportunity for rabbis and teachers to pontificate, to speak, to teach to give a long drush, a long devar Torah, a long teaching about the Parshat, and certainly about the Passover, and of course to discuss many of the very unique mitzvot, halachot about Passover, a lot of laws concerning how we celebrate Passover, how we prepare the house, how we prepare ourselves, how we prepare our food, and usually in the weeks leading up to Passover, in synagogue each day, and of course on Shabbat, at the conclusion of the service, 5 or 10 minutes are dedicated toward reviewing and teaching halachot, teaching the laws and traditions of how we are to properly prepare for and observe Passover. This year it's all do it DIY, I guess, or of course there are many teachings and discussions online, and many of them are very, very valuable, very useful, and I encourage everybody to take advantage of being at home and probably in front of a computer and check out these things. There's a lot up there, not just Temple Talk. So, we have a lot to talk about, not to mention Israel's government, which still hasn't been formed, even though the elections were, I guess, really only about 3 weeks ago, but it seems like an eternity at this point. But there is progress being made, and we'll talk about that a little later. And today, it's the 6th day of Nisan, as I said, and of course, Nisan, as we've been talking about, was the day of the dedication. The first of Nisan was the first day of the dedication of the Tabernacle in the desert, the Tabernacle that we read about in the concluding chapters of the book of Exodus, that the children of Israel were building this house for God's presence, and at the very conclusion, Moshe finally assembled the tabernacle and sanctified and blessed the tabernacle, and we're still in that period right now, even in the book of Leviticus. We're still in that 7-day period between the 23rd day of Adar and the first day of Nisan. Now, the first day of Nisan is going to happen not this Shabbat in our Torah reading, but next Shabbat, next week, when we read Parshat Shmini, which is the 8th day. That is the 8th day after the conclusion of the building of the tabernacle and the ensuing 7 days of dedication and preparation. And the 8th day is the 1st of Nisan. That's not this week's Torah reading, but next week's. So we are still involved in the details of the preparation of the tabernacle and the training of the kohanim, the temple priests. Last week's Parshat Vayikra, we talked all about korbanot, all about the offerings. And every kind of offering was mentioned, and there are many kinds of offerings, and they're mentioned in detail how they are to be brought, how they are to be offered. And it almost seems like this week in Parshat Tzav, which actually means command, because it begins like this in the Hebrew, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor Tzav et Aharon v'et banav lemor. And Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, command Aharon and his sons, saying, and then it goes on to teach. This time, they're going to be going over the same types of offerings, but this week's Parsha, we are learning the offerings from the perspective of the kohanim. That meaning how they are to perform them. What's their role? What's their job? What's their responsibility? What are their privileges? For example, many of the offerings, the kohanim, either the kohen who's making the offering or the kohanim that are serving that day in the temple, are able to eat part of, sometimes all of the offering, and sometimes their families are able to join them. And it's important to emphasize that the offerings were, by and large, they were eaten by the kohanim in the sanctified area of the temple, meaning in the inner courtyards, and it was part of their avodah, part of their service. It wasn't a bonus. You get to go out and have a meal. No, this was part of the service, of course. Hopefully it was an enjoyable meal. But and sometimes the portions were rather small. But it was a service. It was part of their responsibility, part of the process of bringing the offerings. Of course, we talked about the offerings at length last week, and what they mean, what it's all about, and we tried to understand as best we can in light of the fact that we're not making offerings these days, and so it's literally impossible to get inside what the offerings are all about. We can just try our very best to glean from what the Torah has to say, from what our sages have to say, and trying to understand the inner significance. But what we do know is that the offerings were the heart of the temple service. There were offerings every day. The offerings were accompanied by the Levitical choir, the music, the singing, and playing of instruments. And the service took place during daylight hours. There was no service in the evening, in the darkness. Usually overnight, a whole offering, korban shalem, would continue to be incinerated on the altar fire, because this was one offering that was burnt completely, and so it was a time-consuming event. The following morning, one of the first things, perhaps the first thing that the kohanim would do in the morning after preparing themselves and washing their hands and feet at the kior, at the copper laver, is that they would clean up the ashes from the previous day's offerings. And we'll just read the first few verses of our Parashat, Tzav. And again, chapter 6, beginning with verse 1. And Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, command Aharon and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. That is the burnt offering which burns on the altar all night until morning, and the fire of the altar shall burn with it. And the Kohen shall don his linen tunic, and he shall don his linen trousers on his flesh, and he shall lift out the ashes into which the fire has consumed the burnt offering upon the altar, and put them down next to the altar. He shall then take off his garments and put on other garments, and he shall take out the ashes to a clean place outside the camp. And the fire on the altar shall burn on it, and shall not go out. The Kohen shall kindle wood upon it every morning, and upon it he shall arrange the burnt offering, and cause the fats of the peace offerings to go up in smoke upon it. So, the first task in the morning is to clean off yesterday's ashes and to restoke the fire for the new day's offerings. And of course, we've talked about this every year, the symbolism of cleaning up yesterday's ashes. The first thing you do each morning is, as you bring in the new day, is you empty out the old day. Yesterday's ashes, they're done and gone. There's no fire left. It's burnt out. It's finished. Whatever yesterday was, we take with it that which we can take with us, the holiness, hopefully, that yesterday's service, even in our own personal lives, grants us and ensconces us within. But yesterday's ashes, we need to place outside of the area of the Holy Temple, in the desert outside the encampment in Jerusalem. There was a place north of the Temple Mount where the ashes were brought to, discarded, and that was part of the service, and a very important part. Again, yesterday was wonderful. Yesterday was beautiful. Yesterday was hopefully full of God's presence and blessing. And now today is a new day. So we start afresh and clean off the ashes of yesterday's activities, yesterday's offerings, and bring today's offerings. A very beautiful lesson that we can take with us even today, as we are currently not bringing offerings to the Holy Temple, but God willing, we'll do that someday soon. But that's how the day began. And that is the beginning also of this week's Torah reading of Tzav. And you get a glimpse here of the direction of this week's reading. It's directed toward the kohanim, toward Aharon and his sons, and what their responsibilities are, how they are to deal with the offerings. That's the first half of the reading. The second half then goes on to the actual sanctification of the kohanim, of the priests, which Moshe performed on them. They were each anointed after they were fully dressed in their garments, and also the sanctification of the tabernacle and its vessels. Again, anointing oil was a significant part of that process. And so we read at the conclusion of Parshat Tzav, in chapter 8 of Leviticus, beginning with verse 1, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Take Aharon and his sons with him, and the garments, and the anointing oil, and the sin offering bowl, and the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread, etc., and assemble the entire community at the entrance of the tent of meeting." And this is the beginning of the whole process of the sanctification of the priests, the last step before the actual temple service, or in this case, the tabernacle service, the service of the Mishkan, will begin. And then we're off. And the daily offerings and the special festival offerings and all the offerings of individuals who choose to bring them, it begins and it continues. It continued from that point on for nearly 1,000 years, with a break after the destruction of the first temple, and then of course with the destruction of the second temple in the year 70 CE, which is 1,950 years ago, was the last time that we know of with a certainty that offerings were brought. There is speculation that there might have been offerings brought even during the era of Bar Kokhba, who was some 60 some odd years after the destruction of the temple. But for certainty, the year 70 put an end to the offerings, and now in the modern era, Israel's return to the land of Israel, return to Jerusalem, return to the Temple Mount, there are many of us who are anticipating and preparing for the renewal of the divine service, the avodah, and the bringing of the korbanot, the offerings on the altar. And of course, one of the most important offerings is the offering of the korban pesach, the Passover lamb, which is to be brought by every family or group of kinsmen or community people. They form what's called a chavurah, from the word chaver, friend, and also means to join together. And each person is an official part, a recognized part of that chavurah, and each person gets a piece of the korban pesach, the Passover offering, during the Seder. And of course, this year it would be extremely difficult, even if we had the Holy Temple. How would we do it? There'd have to be special provisions. Someone actually, I can't think of the English word. They appealed to the High Court of Justice here, which is the civil law court, civil Supreme Court here, and asked for them to tell the rabbanut, the rabbinical service here, to insert a second Adar. Right? Sometimes we have 2 Adars, sometimes because we have to adjust the calendar. But in ancient times, in the times of the Holy Temple, if there was torrential rains, if the roads had been washed out and things were uncertain, unsafe, that things would make it difficult for the pilgrims to actually make it to Jerusalem on time, the Sanhedrin could institute a second Adar, which would push Passover off a month, and they giving time to prepare the roads and fix everything in time so people could actually get to Jerusalem on time. The High Court here said that it was not in their purview to make a ruling on this, which is very unusual since we have a very, very activist High Court here, which seems to think it's purview to stick its nose in everybody's business, but that's a different subject. In any case, it would be a very strange Passover were there a holy temple today, and it's going to be a very strange Passover even without the holy temple today, as people are being instructed to basically just stick with your nuclear family and not have a lot of company over, and certainly not invite the grandparents because we don't want to get older people infected. It's very, very, very daunting. The idea of Passover this year, but we're all going to do our best, and of course we're all going to do it. And God willing, next year we will be able to celebrate in high style as we like to. But this year is going to be a challenge, and it's a challenge simply going to the supermarkets and getting the provisions that we need. And but so far so good. We're dealing with it. We're doing our best. And speaking of doing our best to deal with the current situation, of course, the Temple Mount is closed to peoples of all faiths, and that is something that's very, very, very difficult to even comprehend, let alone to live with, because of course, we report all the time, we're used to people going up, more and more people going up to the Temple Mount. And of course, at the beginning of the Corona crisis, groups were going up specifically to pray on behalf of all the nations for salvation, for rescue from the coronavirus. And now, whatever prayers we have to make, we are making them, but not on the Temple Mount. Here's the music. Have a little break, and I'll be right back at Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Yitzhak Rubin here in Jerusalem. Quiet town these days, as everybody has been told to stay home and only go out for things that are absolutely necessary. And even those absolutely necessary things have been defined, and they are actually very limited. But work is one in certain cases. And this is the first time, as I said earlier, I've been in the office here in Jerusalem in a week. But enough of that for now. Today is the 6th day of Nisan, 5780, March 31st, 2020. The 6th day of Nisan was the 6th day of the 12 days that the heads, the chieftains of the 12 tribes of Israel brought offerings on behalf of their tribes. This is described in the book of Numbers, in Parshat Naso, and I don't have in front of me what chapter, but it's described every tribal leader would bring the identical offerings in terms of the animals and other riches and things that they brought, and each day is described separately. So basically, there are 12 sections, consecutive sections in the Torah reading of Naso, which we read later in the summer. in which everything is identical except for the name of the head of the tribe and the tribe itself. Today's tribe on the sixth day is actually the tribe of Gad, G-A-D, and the tribal leader was Eliasaph ben Deuel, and it was his day. And in fact, in many synagogues, again, when the synagogues are open, every day of the first 12 days of Nisan, at the conclusion, usually of the service, that section of Torah is read. It's a paragraph, and that way you get to follow day by day and relive those first 12 days of the temple service or the tabernacle service in the desert, in which each of the tribal leaders brought gifts. Again, just another image of the unity and brotherhood and enthusiasm and peace and harmony that completely enveloped Israel as they assembled and inaugurated and began the service of the tabernacle. Many people say today, well, we're not ready to build a temple yet. We need to first have unity among the people. We need what they call, baseless love. People just need to love one another and stop the fighting and stop the feuding and stop the name calling. And that's all true, but I think nothing proves more than the actual, when we read what we read in Exodus and what we're reading now, that it was the actual fulfilling of the commandment to build a tabernacle, to build a sanctuary for God that brought the people together, that brought peace to the people. It wasn't right before the beginning of the construction of the tabernacle was the golden calf, and there was chaos, and there was death and destruction, and it wasn't good. And it was the actual, so someone would say today, well, we first have to get over that. We have to get better. We have to, improve ourselves. We have to, get back to, being true to God before we can even begin to think about building a tabernacle or a holy temple. But in the case of Israel in the desert, it was the actual initiation of the building of the tabernacle that brought everyone together. We read it so clearly that everyone brought their donations and everyone brought their skills and participated in the building and fashioning and assembling of the tabernacle. And again, at the conclusion of that and the inauguration of the tabernacle, then the 12 tribal leaders brought their gifts. So nothing brings the people together more than building a sanctuary, creating a space for Hashem, a common space, a shared space for us all, for Hashem's presence, so that we can be, as individuals and as a nation, with God, here and now. Nothing brings people together more than that, in my humble opinion. So, Corona or no Corona, the time is now, as it always is now, to begin the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. And of course, that's what we do here at the Temple Institute. We busy ourselves day and night with doing what we can to inspire people and to educate people and to bring it a little bit closer. And hopefully it'll catch on. It is catching on. And one of these days, it's just going to take off, and I think we'll all be taken by surprise. So it'll happen before we even know it. Let's just skip to the conclusion of this week's Parshat, the last few verses, and it says, and Moshe said to Aharon and to his sons, cook the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting and eat it there, and the bread that is in the basket of the investiture offerings as I have commanded, saying, Aharon and his sons shall eat it. And whatsoever is And whatever is left over from the flesh and the bread, you shall burn in fire. And you shall not leave the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days until the day of the completion of your investiture. Investiture days, your days of preparation. He will inaugurate you for the 7 days, as he did on this day. So Hashem has commanded to do, to effect atonement for you. And you shall stay day and night for 7 days at the entrance to the tent of meeting. You shall observe the Hashem's commandment, so that you will not die, for thus I was commanded. And Aaron and his sons did all the things that Hashem commanded through Moshe. So there, these 7 days of preparation, they are commanded to stay at the entrance, day and night, of the tent of meeting. You know, it's reminiscent of our orders today. Stay home. You know, don't venture out. Stay home. It's very interesting. And of course, Passover, the Passover Seder is all about staying inside, because there is a plague outside. There's something bad going down outside, and you need to stay inside. The idea of, seeking refuge indoors is a very old Jewish idea. And of course, you can go all the way back to Noah, who, of course, sought refuge, was told to seek refuge in the ark with the animals while devastation was taking place outside. So the idea of having to stay inside, while it might not be the most pleasant or easy thing to get through, it is something that we've been commanded before, and there's some comfort in that, because it's a proven prescription for getting through bad times, proven prescription that we should take very seriously. By the way, it was pointed out to me, I read somewhere last Shabbat, something I'd not noticed before, and that is the word Mishkan in Hebrew, tabernacle, in English, is used, I think I read that it's used only twice throughout the book of Leviticus. And the more common expression used in the book of Leviticus is Ohel Moed, which means tent of meeting. In English, it's a very, very beautiful expression in Hebrew, Ohel Moed. Ohel is a tent, and it also means to cover something. Like even a canopy is ma'ahil, it covers what's beneath it. And moed can mean many things. It can mean meeting, because it's a gathering of people, and it can mean appointed season. Our holidays are referred to sometimes. One term is moadim. We say moadim l'simcha. We should have happy holidays. And a moed is an appointed season. It's a time that we've set in advance where we're going to get together. Of course, the three pilgrimage festivals are the moadim. And it's the word Eden, among other things, means time. So I said Eden. So you might think, oh, the Garden of Eden. Yeah, the Garden of Eden was a garden of time. That's one way of looking at it. And this tent of meeting is a tent of time. So a tent takes up a physical space, a volume of space, while time is a measurement of time. So Ohel Moed is this tabernacle that straddles these two dimensions and simultaneously sanctifies these two dimensions by bringing them out of the ordinary time space continuum and setting it aside and connecting it to God's presence, which is limitless and endless and has no measure. So Ohel Moed it's almost like the active ingredient. It's just another reflection, another understanding of the Hebrew Mishkan, which is based on the word shechen, which is to dwell. In modern Hebrew, shchuna is a neighborhood, and I'm a shechen, I'm a neighbor in that neighborhood. And of course, it was called Mishkan because God's presence would dwell within it. So, just wanted to mention that. I'd like to, since we have time, and a little bit of space left in today's show, I'd like to talk about the political situation here in Israel because it's involved, and I don't know, if you don't live here and you're not really participating and paying attention, it's really hard to understand. So I'd like to try to explain it. Al regel echad, as we say in Hebrew, meaning on one leg, which is an expression meaning quickly, in a condensed version, a version that can be quickly and easily understood. We had elections, again, I think it was 3 weeks ago. It was a week before Purim, it was a week before the corona, and it seems like it was years ago. And what happened? It was the third election in a year, literally within 1 year, within 12-month period. And we had the same results each time, in that neither the right wing nor the left wing in blocks can form a government. Now, the Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party, had the most seats, won the most seats, and the second largest party was the blue and white Kachol-Levan party, which was going to try to create a left-wing government, and their motto all throughout their campaigns were, "We're not going to just not Bibi," because they dissed Bibi because he's been indicted and will be going up on trial, indicted for bribery, for fraud. I don't know. In my opinion, some very questionable charges. But he will be going on trial. And on the other hand, they said they would never, ever form a government with the Arab Joint List, which is a party which is mostly an Arab party. And most of their support comes from the Arab population in Israel. But these representatives are known supporters of terror, and they have connections with terrorists, and they are against the Jewish nature of the state of Israel. And so they are considered to be a very dangerous, very, very dangerous idea to try to form a government in which they would have any power and say. And these three generals, who were three of the four people leading the blue and white party, shamefully went chasing after them, because if they had them, they could potentially, in theory, possibly form a government, or at least pass some laws that would outlaw Netanyahu. It was all exceedingly undemocratic. It was exceedingly in bad taste, and it was really pretty disgusting. And people, victims of terror, families of victims of terror, were protesting, and they were basically being laughed at by these Arab Knesset members. And it was all in very, very, very bad taste, with the potential to do unquestionable harm to the Zionist enterprise, to the state of Israel, and to the Jewish nature of the state of Israel. Well, all their plans failed, and because some of them got cold feet and they said they wouldn't go along with that. And then Corona crisis became the focus, and the idea, the need for a government, for a unity government, for a broad government, became more and more and more crucial. And so, after a whole lot of nasty parliamentary tricks, the head of the Blue and White Party decided he would join a Netanyahu-led government, and at some point they would switch roles. Netanyahu would step down from being prime minister, and Gantz would become prime minister in another year and a half or something. And this led to the breakup of his party, Blue and White, because there were those who were diametrically opposed to this. So right now, they're having coalition talks in order to form a government. Some kind of government, it seems pretty certain, will be formed. Gantz crossed the Rubicon, and he can't go back. He has no one to go back to. He has no party anymore if he goes back. And other people from other parties have said they'd like to join the government now also. So there will be a government. Hopefully this government will not abandon some of the important, very, very important achievements that the outgoing government were able to achieve, such as being able to extend Israeli sovereignty to the Jordan Valley and to the Jewish communities across Judea and Samaria. And hopefully that will be carried out. But again, a unity government. So there are personalities and forces in this blue and white splinter party now who are against it. And you make the Netanyahu will make some kind of agreement and compromise, and I hope he doesn't compromise on those very, very important things, because the chance might not come around again so quickly to be able to do that with the full support of the United States, and with a government here in Israel that is ready to do it. So, speaking of good timing in terms of space-time continuum, I hope that potential will be fulfilled, and we'll have good news later on in this year. But in the meantime, a government is quite critical and crucial to the current government, outgoing government's ability to lead the fight against Corona. Although I must say that I've been very impressed, and I think many people, I know that the Poles have been very, very impressed by the way the government is handling the crisis. Every day we have new instructions, new orders, and they are hovering over us like worried parents, which you don't always want your government to hover over you like worried parents, but in a time like this, it actually is comforting, and they seem to be making the right decisions. And there is, at this current moment, some signs that the exponential growth of the virus, which everybody probably by now has heard that expression 1,000 times and has some understanding of what they're talking about, is flattening out, so that the curve is flattening out, and it allows the health system and the hospitals to get ahead of the virus if that happens, and be more prepared and able to treat people that get sick. So God willing, that is what's occurring right now. And again, it's right in the middle of holiday season, so no matter what you tell people, who knows, will Passover bring a new outbreak, because people will be in some format getting together. We hope not. And we just got to, we have to be thinking about ourselves and thinking about others, because we don't want to get sick, and we don't want ourselves to get other people sick. So that is the key word here. And everybody is responsible for one another. And that is really, one of the prime ingredients, components of a healthy society is mutual responsibility for one another. And we need to always have that and be aware of that and aim for that. In this case, it's really, it's in our face. It's right there in front of us. We have to be responsible for one another. And God willing, we'll get through all this. And God willing, next Wednesday evening, we will have a wonderful Passover, each and every one of us. And I wish for everybody around the world a very, very beautiful, peaceful Passover. And of course, Passover, that first Passover, we were told to stay in your houses and slaughter the lamb and paint your doorposts with blood, because that will be the sign that God will pass over your house and you will be spared in this horrible plague. Then it was the firstborn, and this year it's Corona. So please stay in your houses, be safe, and Passover will have its own special meaning this year and its own special beauty, I'm sure. And who knows, being in smaller groups, maybe we'll discover things that we never discovered before about the Passover, and be able to take it into the upcoming year, and of course to next year's Passover. And Passover, as I said, begins on Wednesday evening. Will there be a temple talk next week? It depends on two things. One, it depends on the orders, the regulations, whether I'll be able to travel here. If not, I might be able to do it from home. But the other unknown at this point is getting ready for Passover is always, the last 72 to 96 hours is 24/7. It's by the time you sit down for your Seder, you're pretty exhausted. And if I have the time and the ability, I certainly really, really would love to be able to put out one more temple talk before Passover. But in any case, once again, I wish everybody health, and a happy, sweet Passover. God bless everybody. Temple Talk.